All right. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you today to our Strategic Farming Let's Talk Crops program. Happy that you joined us today for our session on data-driven decisions, determining what really affects our bottom line. And these sessions are brought to you by U of M Extension and support from the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council and the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council. I'm Liz Stahl. I'm an Extension Educator in Crops out of the Worthington Regional Office, and our speakers today will be Jennifer Burhill. She's an Extension Educator with the University of Nebraska, and Dr. Angie Peltier. She's with U of M Extension, also an Extension Crops Educator there as well. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jenny, if you want to start today, and then we'll have Angie talk after that. So.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Liz, for inviting me to share today. I'm a Nebraska Extension Educator. This is going to be my 21st year in Extension, and I'm an agronomist and plant pathologist by training. I was asked to share on our on-farm research program that we have in Nebraska. Our on-farm research program has been going since the 1990s, and it's a great way for producers to really test the questions that you all have on your own farms using your own equipment and just really being able to hopefully get the answers that you need. When I think about on-farm research, I think about intentionality and excellence. And it really starts with the questions that you all have. You're going to a lot of meetings, you read a lot of things online or in farm magazines, and you may wonder, will that production practice work for me on my farm? So for us with on-farm research, we really focus on what is that original producer's question. And from there, it goes into a solid design. We really need a solid design if we're going to get the answers. And I'm going to explain that next for you. If we look at this field here, and I'm going to ask you in the chat to just respond with, I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask you to respond in the chat with how you would do this. Well, let's say that this is your field and you want to test a specific product. How would you test that product? And a lot of times a producer would say, I'm going to split the field in half. So if you split the field in half, the problem is we have variability across the fields. So if you look at this yield map, you can see that we have better yields as we go to the left on this field. So if we split the field in half, where are you going to put the product and where are you going to put your check? In that case, then, are you going to give the benefit to the product on the best part of the field, or are you going to make the product work for itself on the lower yielding end of the field? And at the end of the day, how do you know it really made a difference? And that's what we really stress to farmers, because I have a lot of farmers that tell me, well, we are testing things in our own farms, but a lot of times farmers are doing this. They're splitting a field in half, and there's so much variability in all of our fields. Even if we have similar soil types, there's other things that are creating variability. So then I have farmers that tell me, well, I'll just replicate across the field. So in this case, we've got the product and the check, and it's replicated across the field. And replication is really good. And our variability is going across the field. So in the chat, do you feel like this would be a solid design? If we're replicating in this field, does this help us answer our question? And I don't know, not yet. Okay, very good. Okay, and some say yes. Okay.
Getting split answers here, yep.
Yeah, this is good. This is good. Thank you for responding. So in this case, we do have replication. It's closer but not complete. Very good. I like that answer. It is closer because we do need replication. But in this case, because we have the variability going towards the left across the field, in this case, the product is always on the left side of the check. And if you remember, the left side of the field as we go across is always gaining in our yield. And so in this case, we're still always favoring the product in each one of these pairs of reps. So what we really need is we need replication and randomization. So randomization means we just mix the different treatments up so that we're not always giving favoritism to one treatment or the other. In this case, we have product, and then we threw the check before the product, and in this case, the check before the product. There's different ways of making your randomization. You can pull things out of a hat. You can work with someone on the randomization, but in this case, we've got randomization plus replication, so we're not favoring one treatment over another. Now, when I start showing this, farmers are like, oh man, that looks like too much work. But really, with today's technology, it makes things so much simpler. So I'm going to give you some examples of some designs that we have producers using. In this case, this is an example of, it's called a paired comparison. But we've got a lot of different things that we can do with our planters where we can basically split our planter. And as you're going through the field, you're basically creating the replication and randomization through the field by splitting up that planter. So examples of things that you can be doing this way could be, depending different seed treatments could be done this way. We've got, even as we are thinking about fungicide, we've had some growers use like a Xyway fungicide treated seed treatment on part of the planter, and then the rest was a check on the other side of the planter. We've had people use different planting seeding rates, just a lot of different things that we could do with a split planter design or a paired comparison design. I've gone to more of this type of a design anymore when it comes to when I need large blocks. So for instance, we've got a number of growers that are using cover crops and they want to test the benefit of that in their fields. And especially when you've got equipment that doesn't match up really well, when you've got drills, when you've got people wanting to spray products, doing foliar applications of different things, whether it's fungicides, insecticides, micronutrients, or other nutrient applications. It's a great way to do this in larger blocks. And then what you do then to get your randomization is you can just take specific harvest passes out of the blocks in order to create your randomization. So I've really gone to this design a lot more for producers who are wanting larger blocks in their fields. And then with the advent of precision ag, we can do a lot with prescriptions as well. And there's probably several of you on the call on this webinar today that are using this. But at least if we always want at least 300 feet. So we try and aim for 350 to 400 feet in each one of these blocks that we do. This was a soybean seeding rate study. We've had people doing different nitrogen ramp studies this way as well. In Nebraska, we have a lot of center pivots. So anymore, we've been doing quite a few like pie-shaped treatments in fields, whether that's applying a product through the pivot, whether it's fertilizer or a chemical of some type. So those are all things that we've been doing as well. And so precision ag really helps us in being able to do different things with our treatments. From there, it's about conducting the study and collecting the data. For collecting the data, I often mention taking pictures is important. It's a good part of the process of documenting what's going on. And then analyzing the results. So the reason why we need a solid design is so that we can truly analyze the results and determine, is there truly a difference between these treatments or not? Once we have the results analyzed, in Nebraska anyway, we put them into an on-farm research book and then we share them at different meetings. So we just had our on-farm research updates in February where producers basically are the ones sharing about their own studies. And what that usually results in is producers interested in other topics, and it just starts the cycle back over. So let's go through some data for you just to show you how are we interpreting the results so that as we're talking about data-driven decisions, what does this really look like? So in this case, this was a producer who was interested in corn seeding rates. And ultimately, with corn seeding rates anymore, we say that the companies already have their curves. And so it's just important to really talk to those seed reps. But this producer wanted to test for himself. Is this like, what rate should I really be at compared to what the seed rep was telling me? So you can see he planted 30,000, 33, and 36,000 seeds per acre. You can see the moisture there. You can see the yields and you can see the net return. So we just do a partial profit, marginal net return based on what's the cost of that treatment compared to the check. And then the yield gain at a specific dollar value, depending on the year. So this was obviously not 2024 data. What we're looking at is we're using a 90% confidence level. So what that means is that we are 90% confident that any differences are due to the treatment itself and not due to random chance. If you were doing brain surgery, you'd want 99% confidence or greater, probably. But in this case, we are using 90%. Would farmers be okay with an 80 or 85%? That's a discussion we've had in our meetings, and they would be. The challenge for us is that with the rigor of academia and trying to show that what we're doing is as valid as what small plot research at university campuses are doing, we stick with the 90%. So as we look at this, when you see the letters that are the same, that means that there's no yield difference scientifically between these treatments. So in this case, both 33,000 and 36,000 are both A's. Even though there's a 2 bushel numerical increase, there's no difference in those yields because as we looked at every single strip throughout the field and we were collecting that data, because of the variability in the field, there's technically no difference here. But there is a difference compared to 30,000 seeds per acre. So I wanted to show you a resource that we have. It's called resultsfinder.unl.edu. And if you go to this website, it has the majority of our on-farm research studies listed on it. And what you can do is you can search by a keyword, and then you can click on these individual studies and bring up the PDFs of these studies. We've been through a lot of transition at Nebraska, and so we don't have the PDFs uploaded since 2020. But you will see that it will say, here, I'll show you the next screen. You will see, like I just searched for fungicides just to see what we had in there, and this is just a quick shot of the first few results. You can see that the PDFs we don't have uploaded yet since 2020, but if you click on, it tells you if it's significant or not, and it tells you what the yields were, just for the time being anyway. So I wanted to just show since Liz was interested in talking about like prophylactic fungicides and insecticide use. This isn't one at tassel time, but this is an example of just what you would see on these PDFs. Every study is given a number to identify who the grower is and where the study was located and also the year of the study, but it's anonymous, so the outside viewer doesn't know who that grower is. We have all the background information on there and precipitation. And then we then put the results in there. So again, in this case, the grower used, he compared a check versus a fungicide application at V10. And in this case, there was a yield difference, and it was for some reason a loss in using that fungicide app at V10. And again, these are not really in-depth research studies. It's more the producers are interested in yield, maybe a few other questions that they have. So we don't always have the answers as to why there's a yield gain or a yield loss one way or the other, but we do have the results at the end. But it informed the producer as to if he wanted to do this again the following year. A lot of times what happens is a producer does a study and then they want to try it on a few more fields just to see if they get the same results. Or what we have is other producers in the room or that read the book are interested in the same thing. This is one showing pre-Axor on soybeans and in furrow on soybeans. And in this case, there was no yield difference. So you can actually go to that website, that resultsfinder.unl.edu, and look for that yourself. We also have growers who are looking at other things outside the box. So I've got a number of growers in the regenerative ag space who are trying to get away from using so many chemicals and also synthetic fertilizer. So this grower was looking at the full company seed treatment versus the biological seed treatment. He couldn't get the company to apply the biological to the full company seed treatment or even on the beans themselves. So he bought his own seed treater and he tested this, and now we have 6 site years of data because this past year, this grower, after the grower showed the results from the first year, 2 other growers wanted to test this too. So then we had 6 site years of soybean seed treatments. And the thing is, when we look at that biological, it was $9 an acre versus the full company treatment was 18 to 28 bucks an acre. And so those are some other things as we look at economics, growers looking at other ways. And will this make a difference for me? I did put the planting dates on here too, because I was curious if the reason why we weren't seeing any yield differences was because of planting date as well, but we did have some earlier planting dates and still no yield difference. So that's just it's just another example of how we're using on-farm research to help our producers make decisions based on data. So with that, that's what I was just going to share for our time for right now, and then I'll be open to questions.
Well, that's great, Jenny. And, before I turn it over to Angie, would you mind just taking a moment just to kind of explain a little bit about the on-farm network? Not everybody might be familiar with, what that is all about and how that works in Nebraska. I know you guys have a really extensive system and have a lot of great information. We did get a question here too, does the U of M have something similar to UNL's on-farm network? And no, we have trials. That's where I'm going to talk with Angie, but we don't have near the extensive network that you do. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind just explaining a little bit of background on that, Jenny, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, it really started just with producers working with local extension educators. And it was just in different counties throughout the state. There'd be a group of educators working with local producers trying to answer questions. So that's how we got a lot of our soybean seeding rate data and seeding date data. We had a group of producers in my area of the state that for basically 6 years, there was 12 producers doing the same studies. And it really created a great body of research right away. And because it was coming from producers and producers were talking about the research, I think it really helped gain credibility for on-farm research too, because it's coming from their peers' fields. So it was just a different way of looking at data and looking at information, and then other producers wanted to try it. But
do you have like one set coordinator across the whole network then, or is
oh,
it multiple people? And
yeah, so it started with just separate groups throughout the state, two separate groups in the state. And then in 2012, we decided to combine and make it a statewide effort. And we do have a director. And the director, so what the commodity groups fund is they provide funding towards like the director's position, also all the books that are printed. We print a book every year of our on-farm research results that are shared with all the producers who come to the meetings and anyone else who wants it, as well as putting it online. So, and then they fund the meetings as well. So that's but they don't really, it's not commodity groups supported regarding the producers aren't paid to do studies. It's the producer doing using their own equipment on their own field. We don't get paid for mileage or anything like that. It's just, that's how it works. It's mostly just boots on the ground, ground level up, based on what the producer wants to test.
That's really cool. And one more quick question before I turn over to Angie. Somebody put in here too, just wondering, how often do farmers get together for this too? And is that
Yeah.
across the state, or is it your groups, smaller groups?
So, yeah, so the farmers get together, well, every February during our meetings, the farmers and ag industry too. We have crop consultants working with us. There's some ag industry professionals that will also work with farmers and us on studies. But like locally, as a local educator, um, so I'll have like brainstorming sessions, or we'll have like local field tours where we'll just do a driving tour of different topics. Like we did a cover crop driving tour one time of all the farmers who were doing the same study. I do text messaging groups so that the farmers are connected who are doing the same studies. But not all the farmers, most of the farmers aren't doing the same studies. And then there was also a question about how the yields are done. So yields are done, there are yields, the majority of the yields are through combine yield monitors. We do ask that they're calibrated. But then I also have a weigh wagon, so I will use that if that's what a producer prefers. Or we also use scales on grain carts. I don't know what you guys call them, but grain carts,
Yep.
they'll have scales that we've calibrated against the tickets from the truck tickets. So we'll use those as well.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, and that can be a good topic of discussion too. But thank you, Jenny. I think what I'll do, I know we got another question here, but I think I'll pull in Angie here right now. If you want to, thanks again, Jenny. Please stick around here for the discussion. And Angie, if you want to share your information, because I know you've done a lot of work with on-farm trials as well, and addressing like these, the big question about these prophylactic treatments, for example, too, those which was one of the things we were interested in covering today. So Angie, I'll turn it over to you.
So I took
I
a
see your
little bit different of a tack here. Rather than going with on-farm trials or even Minnesota specific trials, I'm going to be pulling in a resource that was developed by 19 different states working together. And so I'm hoping that will help to show people the power of collective action, sort of. So let me just tell you what I'm thinking. So first things first, both you and Jenny, Liz, were talking about prophylactic applications. And this is hot off the presses. I just got the crop budget from the folks at the Northland College up in Thief River Falls. They created a Central Red River Valley corn budget. So that's where I am. So that's the corn budget I have here. So in that blue box, you'll see the economics for corn going into 2025. And you can see up at the top here, so I'll point at it with my cursor, gross return per acre. So they're saying on average, in the central Red River Valley, the corn yield is 165 bushels per acre. They're saying that the price received, they're hoping we're going to be up to 419. In yellow there, you see gross return per acre is $691 and change. Now, if you look a little bit below that in pink, we have our direct expenses. That's $642 per acre. There's also overhead expenses. So all told, there in the gray, our total expenses per acre are $742. So when you have more expenses than you do returns, you're farming essentially in the red. So what they're projecting for 2025 is that per acre corn is going to be a negative $50.65 per acre. And so I'm not saying that to depress people. I'm just saying that because you all are not running charities. The goal is to make money farming. And so every trip across the field with some sort of crop protection chemical needs to at least pay for itself through protecting yield potential when compared with an untreated control. And so when we talk prophylactic applications, when you're making an application without disease being present or without looking for disease, that's kind of a risky bet in this economic climate. And so I'm going to share with you some work that's been done by this large group of universities. So there's 43 universities and 2 provinces involved in what's called the Crop Protection Network. So this is a group of land grant universities in the US, and they decided, let's not all reinvent the wheel. Each time we have a question that we need to answer for our producers in our state, let's work together and combine forces and come up with extension materials to help folks nationwide. And so these are the different organizations that are involved here. And this group recently developed what's called a corn fungicide return on investment calculator. And so that's what I'm going to be sharing with you here today. Now, I see Bruce Potter is on the in the audience here today. I know that he's done many fungicide trials in the southwestern portion of the state, the southern portion of Minnesota. I've done some up in the northwest, and I know Dean Malvik has as well. But I wanted to share this larger data set that these folks are use to populate this return on investment calculator. And so there's a lot of data that goes into this. And what's nice is that this is based on 4 years of data, so 2019 through 2022. It's 19 states and Ontario that contributed to the data set. That's 151 site years of data. So they had close to 1,200 cases where they were comparing fungicide treatment to a untreated control. Now, they've included in this calculator the treatment costs. So that's obviously both the cost of the chemical itself and the application costs, the expected benefits they have there of that application, the probability of breaking even. And all of this is really based on data, but even though this is a large data set and the more data, the better for making decisions, there's caveats with everything. These are estimates and there's no guarantee, but this is a large data set and it's the best we have at this point. In these trials, the major diseases of economic importance that they ended up having to manage were southern rust and tar spot. Now, I do know that southern rust did make its way up to Polk County in the northwestern part of the state this year. So southern rust we did have in Minnesota this year. I'm pretty sure not at economic levels, but we do tend to see southern rust in some years. And then tar spot, its geographic range is increasing over time. It's now up over and into North Dakota. So this is something that we will be dealing with going forward. And so these 2 diseases are relevant as well. The fungicides that were tested were selected based on essentially their market share. And they were also selected because they had multiple active ingredients included. So they were mixtures, and there were 12 different fungicides over all of these uniform trials that took place throughout the states. Then they determined the net benefit per acre. And so they determined the difference between the yield of treated and untreated plots, factoring in treatment costs and corn price. And so here's some of the factors that can be adjusted on this calculator. So there's a lot of pre-populated data, but you can actually go in and make adjustments. So as of Monday up in Crookston, the corn price was $4. So I did change the calculator to adjust that. Pre-populated value there is $5 per bushel. So you're going to have to make that change based on the corn price. You can also make adjustments based on disease severity. So they have a low or high disease severity buttons. And what they consider low is approximately 1% severity at black layer on that ear leaf. High disease severity is 5% or greater severity at physiological maturity. And you can actually adjust the final disease severity from 0 to 50%. And then the application price. Now, what they did is they did a survey of fungicide prices and application costs throughout the entire region. And they determined the average application price for these 12 different fungicides that I have listed here. So this is what this looks like. You can make, so over there on the left-hand side, you can see you can make changes based on the disease severity, your expected yield. So it's pre-populated with 180 bushels per acre, and then I made the adjustments for our current corn price. And this is the sort of thing that's generated. So here is what we see for $4 per bushel corn, 180 bushel per acre for our expected yield under low disease pressure. And so you can see across the bottom are listed all of the different fungicide products, and then the bars are showing the expected net benefit per acre. Now, I have a blue line through the middle. That's the break even. So that's $0. So that's where your corn crop was protected enough compared to that untreated control to pay for the fungicide cost. The black line within each of those bars, that's the average over all of those trials. And then so Jenny was talking about our confidence levels. So the gray bars, that's the 95% confidence interval. So what you can see there is that they're 95% sure that the expected net benefit per acre is going to fall somewhere within that gray bar there for each of those fungicides. And so with comparing those black lines in each of those gray bars to that blue line, you can see that very few of our fungicides are going to have a positive expected net benefit per acre when we have very low corn prices and we have very low disease pressure. Let's change this scenario up. So not only do they show you this graph, they also show you a break-even probability and then expected net benefit per acre. So only 3 of our products that they had listed here on the calculator had essentially a coin flip chance of breaking even or slightly above a coin flip. In my mind, under these economic conditions, I'm not sure I'd want to bet the farm on that. Here's $4 per bushel corn, 180 bushel per acre expected yield under high disease pressure. So here's that blue bar again. Again, you're still not seeing tons of positive expected net benefit per acre, although you can see there's a couple more that were at that coin flip or slightly above the coin flip expected break-even probability. But still, at low corn prices, this is something that you really ought to think twice about. Now, here's a scenario where we have $6 per bushel corn. So let's say we have a really bad drought this year. We still have the same expected yield, and this is under high disease pressure. So higher corn prices, higher disease pressure. And what you can see, look at that difference. So many more of those average expected net benefit per acre black lines in each of those bars is above that break-even line. Okay, so you can see here, boy, So if your fungicide plus application cost is around $30 per acre and corn is $6 per bushel, you would only need 5 bushels per acre over the untreated with your fungicide application in order to break even. So those economics and the probabilities are much more in your favor if you wanted to apply a fungicide when you have those economic and disease pressure conditions. Now, thinking back to, okay, if we have those same application costs and corn is $4 per bushel, we'd need 7.5 bushels per acre to break even with a fungicide application. And so we're much less likely to be able to do that when we have lower corn prices and we don't have high disease pressure. So a couple of things to consider when we're thinking about prophylactic or targeted fungicide applications. What are you targeting? It's important to know that. And the reason it's important to know that, and I have in the blue box on the right-hand side, tar spot. So what we have here is a fungicide efficacy for control of corn foliar diseases table. It's pretty nice. It's put out by the Crop Protection Network as well. And you can see, just looking in that box, it's giving you the efficacy of all these different products. Some aren't labeled for tar spot, some have good level of control, some have poor, some have excellent. So knowing what you're protecting the crop against, so scouting your fields is going to be very important because not every product will work equally well against every particular pathogen. We would say that in general, prophylactic applications aren't recommended for several reasons. So we've already talked about how the economics just don't work when disease pressure is low. There's a couple of things you can assess in your field to determine your disease pressure. So scout your field before tasseling and look for symptoms. If you don't know what those symptoms are that you're seeing, we have something called Digital Crop Doc in Minnesota, where you can take pictures, answer a couple of questions, and we can provide a visual diagnosis for you. So if you know which diseases are impacting your crop, then the next thing you need to determine is, does your hybrid have no, some, or high levels of genetic disease resistance? Because our hybrids, if they have good disease resistance, that's no additional cost disease management right there. However, I've seen in the ag press and in advertisements, some hybrids talked about as fungicide responsive. In my mind, that just tells me that's disease susceptible hybrid. So that's something to consider. And then do our current condition. So if you do see these symptoms, and it's a disease like tar spot, for example, or like northern leaf blight, gray leaf spot, that sort of thing. If you see a disease like that, see symptoms of a disease like that, that has the capability to have repeating cycles of infection, you should really take a look at the forecast. Do your conditions favor additional cycles of infection? If so, and if you don't have good disease resistance in your hybrid and you see the symptoms, I mean, you're standing on more solid ground in making that sort of fungicide decision then. The other thing I wanted to mention is that in that efficacy chart I showed you, there's 3 main fungicide groups that are available in corn. There's group 3, group 7, and group 11. Now, every time we make an application, there's a chance that we're going to select out an individual's of that pathogen that's able to survive our fungicide to replicate. And over time, as these shifts take place, we can end up from a sensitive population to a resistant population, meaning that that particular fungicide will no longer work. So if you have a fungal population that's resistant to one of the group 3 fungicides, for example, basically cross off all group 3 fungicides from your list. So we have limited tools in our toolbox, and so we really need to reserve them for when we have an actual problem. And then just a disclaimer, there's a lot of data, but the folks that develop that calculator just want to tell you that there's caveats involved as well. So that's what I have, Liz.
All right, great. Thanks, Angie. I learned something new today too. I didn't know that calculator was out there either. So that's really interesting to hear about. And I see, if anybody's got any questions, we have some questions popping up here. Again, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box for either of our speakers. But Angie, I think we've got a few for you here. Want to be kind of questions about the trials that you were talking about. Do you have any idea, like what was the sample size by product, for example?
Well, these
I'm assuming they're on
yeah,
farm, or excuse me, on station, like small plot research, probably.
right. So we have, I think it was 151 site years of data. I believe not every fungicide was used in each of the trials. However, more than 100, more than 100 site years. And if you think about it, those are all replicated. So within each site year, there's 4+ replications of each treatment. So this is pretty robust data set. Now, this trial did not look at stalk lodging, but I will tell you, my shoulder is still not liking the fact that I split so many stalks in my day. I've done a lot of fungicide trials looking at stalk rot as well. And what I've seen is that it's only when we are protecting the crop against some known foliar disease issue that could be impacting the crop. So what happens when we have foliar disease issues in our corn, for example, if there's enough disease, that means that the photosynthetic area of the leaf tissue has been compromised. And so when the corn plant goes to essentially fill out those ears and fill out the kernels, if it isn't able to get enough sugars through photosynthesis, sometimes it can rob the plant, the stalk, of those sugars to fill out the ear. What we found, though, is that in the absence of disease, you will not have an impact on stalk rot. So when we didn't have a foliar disease that we were managing with that foliar fungicide, we didn't see an effect on stalk rot. And then I see here are prophylactic applications recommended for soybeans. Same deal, no. And the reason for that, in addition to all of the other reasons that we've talked about, we do have instances of resistance now in some of the fungi that attack soybeans. So frog eye leaf spot is one of the diseases that's moved into Minnesota in the last several years. This is something that as our temperatures become a bit warmer and we get higher humidities over time, I expect that this could be a significantly yield limiting pathogen. The problem is we now have resistance to the group 11 fungicides in the frog eye leaf spot fungal populations in Minnesota and North Dakota. So do know that every time we make an application, there's a chance that we could be selecting out resistant populations of our fungus. And so just from a tools in the toolbox perspective, let alone thinking about economics, we really would not recommend that.
Well, and Angie, I'll throw this out to you too. So are all fungi bad? Because like I'm thinking about insects. Can we create any issues by using a fungicide? Again, are all fungi bad?
Thanks
Are
for
some
that
helping us out?
softball there, Liz.
Throwing you a softball. I like playing softball. Getting old for that,
Okay. You said it, I will spike it. Okay. So yes, I mean, just thinking about our soybean aphid situation. I mean, if we have a nice year where there's rain and we have fungi in our environment that are entomopathogenic, they're able to colonize some of our insect pests. If we prophylactically spray a fungicide, we could be taking out some of those fungi that help to keep our disease, or excuse me, those fungi that help to keep our insects populations in check. So yeah, everything, with biology, every time we mess with Mother Nature, it seems, unintended consequences.
No, excellent. And you'd have a harder time spiking it, but good. I think that's like a home run. I'll say that. But and Jenny, if you're still around too, just kind of both of you, I have a question here. And again, feel free to answer any questions anybody has any. Just curious, in the research that you have all worked with, what would you say typically is the minimum bushels that people need to see to have a difference? Do you have kind of a guideline? When somebody says, hey, well, I got a bushel more per acre, or I'm just even thinking like, yeah, just, what to have a significant difference out in the field, or what would be variability? What have you typically seen out there? And I don't know, Jenny, if you want to comment on that, and then Angie, see, because you have more of the small plot research trial, but on-farm trials, do you have kind of a guideline or just general observation of that?
I don't, because fields are so variable. So and that's why we stress on farm research. Because of that, we can see sometimes there will be no yield, like maybe sometimes we'll see significance with 1 bushel. Sometimes we won't see significance at 5 bushels. And it's all based on the variability across the field and what those individual strips across the field yielded based on that variability.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah. And it also depends on the number of replications you have. And, even if you do see significance, does that significance make sense? So Jenny was showing us earlier, I think it was your V10 fungicide application, that you saw the opposite of what you would want to see. So there's biologically relevant significance, and then there's economically relevant significance too. So those are all things to keep in mind. But yeah, you're exactly right, Jenny.
No, and again, just into the reps. Let's say somebody does want to try something on their farm. How many replications would you typically recommend that a person do? I mean, Angie, you're talking about a very powerful data set. That's tons of locations, a lot of power to that. But let's say somebody's testing something out on their farm.
Yeah. So we'd say if you only have 2 treatments, like a check versus a product, we'd like to see at least 5 reps in that field. And that's easy to get with the split planner design, or even just splitting a sprayer. You can do this a number of ways. If you have 3 or more treatments, we want to see at least 3 reps, is how we say it. And I would say, Angie, I also didn't know about that tool, so I appreciate learning about that. And I would say for us with the On-Farm Research Network, it's been hard to get data on prophylactic use of fungicide and insecticide, because most of our applications are made with planes. And so it's hard to get planes to leave check strips. But with the advent of technology, we've got more producers using drones. We've got more producers using high boy machines. And there's some products that you can put on the seed or at other times of the year. So in that case, it's I think creating an environment where we could be testing this more on farm for our producers. And Liz, you were asking about some tools, like if producers are interested in this, even if the University of Minnesota doesn't have as many tools as Nebraska does right now, on our on-farm research website, we have a way that you can design your study. And we also have a stats calculator where you just enter in your treatments, you enter in your reps, and it'll spit out the stats for you. So if you go to that website, those are just free tools online for you to use, as well as protocols.
Oh,
That's
great. And I
huge,
think,
guys.
yeah, and I think that is in the chat. We do have like an on-farm website too, with just some just some basic information, guidelines of developing, say you do want to do an on-farm trial, or just the basics of research. And I believe I know you mentioned Bruce, he had a calculator out. I think that's on that same website too, but we'll put that link in the chat. And we did have just a couple more questions here. Just wondering about any comments about soil type differences. Now, I don't know if that was, okay, not with the fungicide trials. Okay, and then let's see, and then here's one for you, Jenny, here. Looking at your example, would it be a benefit to have plots dividing the farm top to bottom as well as the side to side? Yeah, when you had that kind of variability.
Yeah, and ultimately that comes down to the producer. So we work with the producer as to what's reasonable for him or her. If at the end of the day, it has to be simple enough that they're gonna do it, follow the design, follow through, get the data, and that we can share it. So it's a great question. We absolutely could have done that to get more reps and to have more randomization in there and account for more variability.
But I think you bring up a great point too. Again, it's just when you're doing something, any research too, the more treatments you have, the more that plot size can just exponentially increase. It's going to be very, very challenges too. Oh, somebody has a link here to MDA. Is it what's NMI trials? Nutrient management? Do you know what NMI? There's a link in there about some MDA trials. But all right, well, if there's no other questions, I think I'll start wrapping it up here. But again, thank you both for speaking today. I really appreciate your information, a lot of great information. I know I picked up a lot of information myself today. Again, thanks to our sponsors, the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council and the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council. And a reminder, next week we will have our discussion on drones.